In the 6th year of being trapped as a side character in a tragic romance novel, I finally heard the system chime, mission complete. Before I could exit the world, the system granted me 5 days for farewells. So, in those final 5 days, I became the perfect husband, at least in Elizabeth's eyes. She went shopping hand in hand with her crush, and I smiled as I paid for everything. She asked me to donate a kidney to save her beloved, and I signed the surgical consent form without hesitation. Later, I agreed to her request for a divorce. A friend asked me, "How could you bear to let Elizabeth go?" I smiled and replied, "Because I'm going home." Elizabeth suddenly burst through the door, panic on her face like I'd never seen before. "Oscar, aren't you an orphan? Other than here, where else could you possibly call home?" Chapter 1. After word got out that Elizabeth was being transferred to a branch office, co-workers who had long disapproved of her ways rushed over to confirm the news. "Oscar, wasn't Elizabeth just promoted to team lead? Why is she suddenly being sent to a branch office?" Branch offices were understaffed and overworked, no one went there unless they had to. "Didn't you two just buy an apartment downtown? Wouldn't that be a waste if she leaves now? What about you? Are you staying? Are you two gonna sleep in separate cities now?" I only smiled and brushed it off. What they didn't know was that Elizabeth hadn't been transferred, she had volunteered for the move. Just because her crush had returned to China and was now living in City C, she was determined to be near him. The main office had planned to promote her to team lead, and in another 6 months, she'd likely have made project manager. Her stubbornness not only cost her that opportunity, but also disappointed upper management. Even her rivals thought it was a shame, but Elizabeth was perfectly willing. I helped her pack and offered some casual replies to our co-workers before heading home. Like always, I bought groceries and cooked dinner, choosing all her favorite dishes, except carrots. As expected, the moment Elizabeth walked through the door and saw them, she complained, "You still don't know I hate these vegetables." I silently changed my shoes and replied with just one line. "I like them." Elizabeth never cared about what I liked. She kept complaining without pause. She rummaged through the bags and saw that I had only bought pork. Picky as always. She immediately snapped at me. I was used to it. In the past, I would have argued back, but now, she used all her salary to support her crush, Kevin, who had just returned to China. That left all the living expenses and mortgage payments on me. No wonder things were tight. If Elizabeth wasn't home for dinner, I wouldn't even bother buying pork. But now that I knew I only had 5 days left before I could return to my original world, where people actually loved me, my mood had never been lighter. So I explained gently, "I got there late. The other meats weren't fresh. We've still got mortgage payments this month, gotta save where we can." Unlike before, I didn't argue. That made Elizabeth pause, and her tone softened a bit. "All right, I get it." She only ever said more than 2 words to me when we fought. While I was putting groceries away, I set a reminder on my phone's calendar. 5 days. Going home. She glanced over at what I was doing, but unlike before, I didn't look up. I took the pork and walked into the kitchen. Surprisingly, Elizabeth followed. Her expression said she wanted to say something unpleasant. Sure enough, while I was cutting the pork, she said, "Since I'm moving to City C, why don't we just sell the apartment? No point paying the mortgage anymore." I thought I was calm enough, but the moment I heard her say it so bluntly, my hand trembled, the knife slipped, slicing the tip of my finger. Blood dripped onto the cutting board. Chapter 2. Elizabeth, sitting just a few steps away, didn't even glance in my direction. When I didn't respond, she assumed I was unwilling, and her tone climbed a few octaves. "You living here alone is such a waste. Just rent some cheap apartment or whatever. I wasn't really asking for your opinion on this." "Okay." I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. Elizabeth's expression changed immediately. A smile bloomed across her face. "I knew you'd be sensible about it. Hurry and finish dinner. I'm starving." I casually rinsed the blood from my finger under the faucet and went back to chopping pork. This apartment was the only place in this world I could even remotely call a home. Back when we were house hunting, Elizabeth used to hold my hand and say she wanted to give me a safe harbor. I believed her smile meant forever. But now, even if we sold the place, I wouldn't get a single cent. The property deed never had my name on it. Before long, I brought out a simple dinner, 3 dishes and a soup. The ingredients were basic, but the flavor was decent. I hadn't known how to cook before, but after getting together with Elizabeth, I learned every type of cuisine just to cater to her picky tastes. She scooped rice into my bowl. I was stunned for a second, then quickly composed myself. The old Elizabeth had been kind, gentle. She was thoughtful, generous, optimistic, beautiful, and incredibly capable at work. When she first joined the company, everyone said I was lucky to have brought home such a gem of a wife. Who would have thought this perfect wife had her heart entirely set on another man? I kept my head down and ate my favorite carrots in silence. Eventually, Elizabeth broke the awkward mood. "City C's a lot colder than here. Don't you have that wool coat you never wear?" I lent it to Kevin, My chopsticks froze midair. Annoyance flickered in my eyes. That coat. It was what I wore the day I arrived in this world. A gift from my mother. Why didn't you ask me first? Elizabeth frowned, clearly thinking I was being dramatic. You barely wear it anyway. Kevin didn't even mind that it was old. And yet you're getting all worked up. My grip on the chopsticks tightened. That coat was my last tie to the family I loved. I didn't wear it often, not because I didn't care, but because I treasured it. Seeing the growing anger in my eyes, Elizabeth braced herself, expecting the usual shouting match. But to her surprise, I deflated with a sigh. Fine, let's just eat. After all, in the real world, my wardrobe had plenty of coats just like it. Elizabeth was clearly caught off guard, stunned at how easily I let it go. See, life's easier when you're more understanding, she said smugly, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. I shoveled a mouthful of rice into my mouth and mumbled. Got it. From now on, you can deal with everything in this house however you want. You don't need to tell me, because honestly, I don't care anymore. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for more food. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Oscar. What did you say? I repeated myself. The surprise in her eyes turned to doubt. She couldn't figure out when I'd become so considerate. After all, in the past, I really would have argued with her until I stormed out of the house. And every time I made a scene, she'd shoot me down with the same line. If you want to leave so badly, just go. It's not like this place is even your home. Even when the fight was only for show. Those words still pierced my eardrums and yanked at my heart. Chapter 3. What Elizabeth didn't know was that my mission had always been to stop her from getting close to Kevin. When I first transmigrated into this world, the system laid out the original plot for me. Kevin was Elizabeth's childhood friend, the unattainable crush she had pined for. After Kevin's family went bankrupt, he returned to China and ended up being forced into a politically convenient marriage with the heiress of a financial empire. Ambitious and reckless, he tried to take over her family's company before he had even secured a foothold, and ended up dying a gruesome death. During that time, Elizabeth tried to save him. She was kidnapped, set on fire. Not even her remains were recovered, and my mission was to stop her from dying such a tragic death. To do that, every time Elizabeth tried to get closer to Kevin, I would throw a fit, do whatever it took. I became the toxic husband in everyone's eyes. The more I resisted, the more Elizabeth resented me. In contrast, she praised Kevin as gentle, elegant, and considerate. It got to the point where she hardly spoke to me unless we were arguing. But just yesterday, the system announced, mission complete. Last week, Elizabeth and I were fighting all the way into the office lobby, right as Kevin showed up to suck up to her. The three of us ended up bickering for the entire morning. And in a twist of fate, Kevin missed the chance encounter that would have introduced him to the heiress of the financial empire. No marriage, no tragedy. Elizabeth would live. And I, finally fulfilled my purpose. Elizabeth came back to her senses and spoke again, her tone noticeably lighter. That's more like it. I stared at the little dimple on the corner of her smile, dazed. How long had it been? How long since I last saw Elizabeth smile at me like that, with genuine warmth? Ever since Kevin returned, all she had for me was coldness and disdain. But she never once stopped to think, how ridiculous was it for a married woman to use our household money to support a man outside this marriage? I quietly stood up to clear the table. As I reached for the plates, my cut finger brushed against the greasy pan. Sharp pain shot up my arm. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had already picked up her phone, happily texting Kevin. She didn't even spare me a glance. Not that it mattered. I'd soon be out of the picture, just as she'd always hoped, making room for Kevin. After cleaning up, I took off my apron, only to notice Elizabeth's expression shift. The joy on her face darkened into something heavier. I calmly watched her, guessing what excuse she would use this time. And sure enough, she changed her clothes while dialing her phone. Without even looking at me, she said, Kevin seems sick. I'm going to check on him. Her tone was so casual, her urgency, unmistakable, as if Kevin were her actual husband. The concern in her eyes was real, and for a fleeting moment, I felt envy. Envy that Kevin had someone who loved him in this world. Her call didn't go through, and she was starting to frown when she saw me walk over. The moment she looked up, whatever warmth had been in her eyes vanished, replaced by suspicion and irritation. You're going to stop me from seeing Kevin again, aren't you? Before she could finish, I handed her an umbrella and gently straightened her coat. There's rain tonight. Don't get soaked. I almost said come home early, but I swallowed the words down. There was no point anymore. Kevin spoiled you when you were little, I remember. I said softly. He's sick now, so it makes sense you'd want to take care of him. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. Don't wear yourself out. Elizabeth stared at me in a daze, her fingers tightening around her phone. The silence between us stretched and spread. Maybe she never expected me to be so understanding. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. I thought I was doing better, being better. But just when I thought the moment would pass quietly, She shot me a suspicious glare. What are you trying to pull this time? I couldn't help but laugh. So, in her eyes, no matter what I say or do, it's all wrong. It's all fake. If this is what she calls making a scene, then what were all the times I hurt? All the times I got jealous? But it didn't matter. The real me couldn't keep her. The version of me in disguise couldn't hold onto her either. When the door slammed shut behind her, my mind drifted to last month. The weather in April and May had been cold and damp, with wide temperature swings between day and night. Easy to get sick. In order to keep up with the mortgage, I worked 2 jobs, my full-time one, and delivery gigs on the side. I don't even remember what time it was that night when I finished my last run. I collapsed right there in the street. By the time I got to the hospital, my consciousness was already fading. In a haze, I thought I saw Elizabeth. I thought I was hallucinating. I pinched the back of my hand, hard. Only when I felt the sting did I realize. She really came. The lump in my throat was just about to burst when Kevin strolled in through the doorway. Kevin cut his hand by accident, she said lightly. Even in my feverish days, I noticed the little band-aid on his finger. My eyes stung, probably from the fever. I told myself, even though my body temperature was over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, she still left, holding Kevin's hand in hers. Then there was our first wedding anniversary. Maybe Elizabeth still remembered what we once had, because she left a scarf, the one I loved most. Cashmere. Rare. Precious. Just as I reached to take it, Kevin appeared. He looked at the scarf and said nothing for a long time. I was about to snap at him when he leaned in close to Elizabeth's ear and said in a carefully measured tone, "Elizabeth, I thought you bought that for me." She lit up at his closeness. Without a second thought, she wrapped the scarf around Kevin's neck. That was the first time I ever tried to fight for something in front of Kevin. Even my voice cracked with a bit of pleading. Elizabeth, impatient and annoyed, snapped back. "You're a grown man, can you please stop being so petty? It's just a scarf. If Kevin wants it, then let him have it. You can always buy yourself another one." Kevin put on a show of looking apologetic. My hand, which had reached out, slowly fell back down. I clenched my fists so hard, my nails dug into my palms and drew blood. That's when I realized I had never been loved. Chapter 4. Maybe it was all the years of being blamed. Or maybe it was the thought that I'd soon be leaving this world for good, but somehow, my heart finally felt calm. I picked up a broom and began to clean what little I could still call home. As I was tidying up the pile of dirty clothes on the sofa, my eyes landed on a white puffer jacket, and I froze. Not long after the scarf incident, Elizabeth and Kevin had started wearing matching outfits. That day, the project team ran into an emergency, and no one could get in touch with Elizabeth. The higher-ups ended up calling me. I was frantic. This involved whether we'd earn our bonus, and whether we'd have enough to make the down payment on our home. After digging around, I finally learned Elizabeth had been staying at Kevin's place the whole time. We fought about it. Somehow, in the heat of the moment, Kevin's white puffer, identical to Elizabeth's, ended up completely torn. Feathers burst into the air like snow. And then came the slap. I stood there, stunned, staring at the furious Elizabeth, and Kevin curled on the ground. Under her sharp glare, I even started to doubt myself. Had I really torn it that badly? But come on, that jacket cost thousands. Could it really fall apart from a single tug? Still, Elizabeth pinned the blame on me without hesitation. She yanked off my only puffer jacket and threw it on Kevin, snapping. Such garbage quality. If it weren't for the cold, Kevin wouldn't even touch something this cheap. I walked home through a snowstorm, wearing nothing but a thin thermal shirt. Even the office heater couldn't warm me up. Eventually, a coworker, unable to watch anymore, lent me a sweater. My mind returned to the present. I carefully folded and put away Elizabeth's white jacket. That night, I was startled awake by my phone ringing insistently. "Hello, Oscar. Go to the mall and buy a new blanket. Down feather. Bring it to Kevin's place." A blanket? In the middle of the night? Kevin didn't have one. "There's no other blanket there. It's already past 2 a.m. Elizabeth's voice grew more impatient. "Just go already. Kevin's sick and can't sleep without that childhood feeling. You know how rich his family used to be, right? Imported everything. I'm already compromising by asking for goose down instead of those imported ones. Why are you stalling?" I glanced at the cheap, scratchy comforter on my bed, filled with bargain bin cotton stuffing, and I laughed. If I can sleep under this, why can't he? Elizabeth's tone sharpened into something shrill. "Do you even hear yourself? Who do you think you are? Kevin was born with a silver spoon, unlike you, with your rough skin and thick hide. What you call top tier is just bare minimum for someone like him. Don't flatter yourself." I closed my eyes, suppressed the anger boiling in my chest, and hung up. Got it. Later that night, I stood at Kevin's doorstep, cradling a goose-down blanket in my arms, and my nose began to sting. In my real world, I had been a child deeply loved by my parents. When had I ever endured something like this? The hallway was dim. The moment the door opened, The light from inside spilled onto my face. Elizabeth caught sight of my red-rimmed eyes and froze for a couple seconds. She took the blanket and, for once, seemed to grow a conscience. It's cold out. Go home. Leave the door unlocked. I'll be back soon. I nodded, turned around, and left. I didn't take her words to heart. There was a time when I waited every night on the couch. The table just a few feet away held cold, untouched food. I had hoped. I had imagined. And in the end, all of it was buried under layers of disappointment. Chapter 5. Not long after I got home, there was a knock at the door. I turned on the living room light and saw what was in front of me clearly. Elizabeth had indeed come back, but she brought Kevin with her. Even Elizabeth herself seemed a bit embarrassed. She forced a smile and said to me, "Oscar, don't take it the wrong way." Kevin insisted on walking me home because he was worried about me going back alone this late at night. And he even fell while trying to do that. He really needs to get his wound treated. She started getting anxious as she spoke. "He's still sick too, and we can't afford to delay. Aren't you good at dressing wounds? Go grab the first aid kit, quickly." Any shred of hope I had instantly vanished into smoke. When I was injured or sick, or even fainted, Elizabeth never cared. But now Kevin just has a cold and scraped himself without even bleeding. And she's acting like it's the end of the world. I scoffed inwardly and turned to head back to my room. He can treat it himself. What if I mess it up and make things worse for this pampered prince? Before Elizabeth could even react, Kevin cut in quickly. "Elizabeth, it's fine. Don't bother Oscar. I know he doesn't really like me." "Kevin, what are you talking about? Treating your wound is more important right now." Elizabeth helped him sit down. I glanced at my phone. It was 3:30 in the morning. Just as I was about to walk away, Elizabeth stormed over and yanked me back. "Even if you don't want to help, at least tell me where the first aid kit is." "Okay." I turned to her, frowning. "Since when do we have a first aid kit?" "Oh, wait, you mean that little box I used to patch you up with? That's not a real first aid kit. That was something I put together just for you, with emergency meds and supplies." Elizabeth used to get injured easily. Whether it was because of who I was or how I felt about her, I couldn't bear to see her hurt. So I always kept the medicine she might need on hand. But later, when she started running off to Kevin's place every other day, that box had long since been thrown away. She never even considered the meaning behind it. All she heard was that the kit was gone, and she immediately got emotional, yanking on my arm and pushing me toward the door. "If it's gone, then go buy some medicine now." I shook her off. All the frustration and unfairness I had bottled up finally exploded. "Why me? He's sick, not crippled. Wasn't it enough that I bought you guys a blanket? Now you want me to go out and buy medicine too?" I got more agitated as I spoke, leaving Elizabeth frozen in place. "Even if Kevin really was disabled and couldn't go out, can't you order delivery? Does it have to be me so you can feel satisfied?" Elizabeth stared at me in shock. Kevin quickly put on a pitiful face and took 2 steps forward, pulling her into his arms. "Elizabeth, it's okay. Don't make things harder for Oscar. It's my fault for being so weak and making you worry." That snapped Elizabeth out of it. She raised her hand again, about to slap me. "How could you say that about Kevin?" The moment I saw her raise her hand, my heart clenched in pain. Turns out, when someone truly loves another, right and wrong don't matter anymore. She only cares about Kevin, no matter how fake or absurd the situation is. I turned sideways and dodged. Elizabeth clearly didn't expect me to dodge. She couldn't control the force in her hand. With the momentum, as I stepped aside, she stumbled forward abruptly. Just goes to show how hard that slap would have landed. Kevin rushed to steady her and immediately turned on me, yelling, "Didn't you see Elizabeth almost fell? You're her husband and you nearly let her get hurt. Do you have any sense of responsibility at all? Marrying you was the worst mistake Elizabeth ever made." His heartfelt performance was so convincing it actually moved Elizabeth to tears. And just like that, I, the legitimate husband, became the villain. I laughed coldly to myself. "You're the boldest homewrecker I've ever seen." Kevin almost lost control of his expression at that line, and Elizabeth exploded before he could say anything. "How can you talk like that, Oscar? I can't believe I didn't see it before. You're so rude and uncultured. Once this month is over, we're getting a divorce." This month. By the end of this month, I'd already be back enjoying the welcome home banquet my parents were planning for me. Fine by me. With that, I turned and walked back to my room. There was no point trying to reason with people who had no interest in being reasonable. But to my surprise, as soon as Elizabeth saw my indifferent attitude, her rage faltered and panic set in. She rushed forward and grabbed my hand again, disbelief written all over her face. "What did you say? You agreed to the divorce?" I didn't answer her directly. I just shot her a mocking look. "Weren't you the one who brought it up?" I, caught off guard. Elizabeth flushed with guilt, but she didn't let go of my hand. She just stood there, silent and unmoving. Kevin, sensing the shift, quickly stepped in and tried to separate us. "Elizabeth, I'm not feeling well." Elizabeth glanced at him, and the worry in her eyes visibly faded. Honestly, if Kevin were truly sick, There's no way he'd have the energy to argue with me like this for so long. If you're not feeling well, just call a cab and go home. I already told Oscar I'd stay here tonight. I was a bit surprised. Normally, whenever Kevin was around, Elizabeth treated me like I was nothing more than a background prop. No matter what I said or did, she'd always push me aside and leave with Kevin. Even back when I was nearly crushed by work stress. That night, we lay on the bed side by side, in silence. It wasn't until just before dawn that Elizabeth finally spoke softly. "Didn't you say your head's been hurting a lot lately? Tomorrow's the weekend and you don't have to work. I'll go to the hospital with you." My heart stirred, just a little, when I heard her say that. The headaches came from constant overtime and sleepless nights, but at that moment, I thought about it for a second, and agreed. Chapter 6. The next day at the hospital, Elizabeth insisted on dragging me through a full-body checkup, detailed and thorough. When we got to neurology, the attending doctor turned out to be the same one I had seen during a previous visit. He noticed right away that I was in a particularly good mood. "Oscar, your smile hasn't faded all day. What's got you so happy?" The corners of my lips lifted even more as I instinctively replied, "I'm going home." Yes, this was day 3 of the countdown. Right at that moment, Elizabeth walked in holding the report folder. She happened to catch that last sentence. For some reason, she looked startled and uneasy. "Oscar, aren't you an orphan? Other than here with me, where else would your home be?" I snapped back to the present and casually came up with a cover. "This is the last test, right? Once it's done, I can go home and rest." Elizabeth quietly let out a small breath of relief and handed the report to the doctor. She was just about to ask something when Kevin's voice suddenly came from the doorway. "Elizabeth." Kevin looked pale and fragile. His condition was clearly worse than it had been the night before. Neurology was located in a completely separate building. It was obvious Kevin had come all this way on purpose just to find Elizabeth. The moment Elizabeth saw him like that, her expression shifted instantly, that unmistakable look of genuine concern reserved for someone you love deeply, not the routine, empty kind she had when dealing with me. I don't know what Kevin said to her, but when she came back, it was like she'd become a different person. "Come on, let's go do a kidney typing test." Her face was grim, laced with urgency and anxiety. I thought she was just worried about my health. I never expected her to say, "Kevin has a hereditary condition, polycystic kidney disease. His only option now is a transplant." I froze in my tracks and pulled my hand away. "You want me to donate a kidney? What else? It's just one kidney." That one sentence shattered every last illusion I had about Elizabeth. Rage that had been buried deep for so long surged up to my head. My eyes burned, and while I didn't raise my voice, every word rang clear enough for everyone around to hear. "Elizabeth, I'm your husband, and now you want me to give up a kidney for Kevin, that homewrecker. Why don't you donate? Even if your kidney isn't a match. What about Kevin's cousins, uncles, aunts? Don't tell me all his relatives are dead." The moment I said homewrecker, every single person in the hallway turned to Kevin with looks of disgust and contempt. Chapter 7. Kevin's face turned even paler. He tugged at Elizabeth's sleeve and said, "Forget it, Elizabeth. This is all my fault. I'm the problem. That's why none of my relatives are willing to help me. Ever since my family went bankrupt, they've all treated me like a jinx." His eyes turned red, on the verge of tears, putting on a whole tragic act. Even the onlookers who had been watching like it was a drama started to avert their eyes a bit, let alone Elizabeth. Without hesitation, she slipped her hand into Kevin's and then raised her arm, delivering a loud, sharp slap across my face. The crack of it was so crisp that even the nurse who was rushing over to break it up froze on the spot. The sting numbed my nerves, and yet I couldn't help but laugh, just a little. I laughed at myself for still holding out hope for Elizabeth a few days ago. I laughed at the years of effort and affection I poured into her. How could you say something like that to Kevin in public? You know about his family situation, and you still tried to provoke him. What's your deal? I didn't get angry. I smiled instead, but inside, it felt bitter as hell. I couldn't insult Kevin in public, but she could slap me right in front of everyone. Fine, I'll do it. At first, Elizabeth looked a little nervous when she saw me smile, but the moment she heard me agree, her face lit up with joy. "Still," she asked cautiously, "why the sudden change of heart?" I replied casually, "Because you care about him, and I care about you." In a situation like this, even a single sweet line could carry weight, so much so that even Kevin showed a flicker of unease. I could clearly see his grip on Elizabeth's hand tighten noticeably. Elizabeth was still lost in the emotional haze of what I said, and before she could respond, I had already turned and walked into the exam room. As it turned out, my kidney was a good match for Kevin. I finished all the paperwork and signed the consent form without hesitation. With kidney transplants, the sooner the better. Both our bodies met the requirements for surgery. However, with only 2 days left, I had no intention of spending them on a hospital bed, so I requested that the surgery be scheduled for the day after tomorrow. It was just a couple of days difference, and since I was the one going under the knife, Elizabeth didn't overthink it and readily agreed. After that day, Elizabeth never came home again, which suited me just fine. I used the time to tidy everything up. After all, I had lived in this world for quite a while. There were some old things I couldn't bear to leave behind. Whatever I could take, I packed. On the second to last day, I submitted a finalized project proposal to my manager, completed the handover, and formally handed in my resignation. The computer I had bought for work, top of the line, still fetched a decent price when I sold it. Anything with resale value, I sold. Clothes, I donated. Personal items, I trashed. All the letters, notes, and photos documenting my so-called youthful romance with Elizabeth, I burned them all. That night, Elizabeth still didn't come back. Word was she was out having meals and borrowing money from anyone she could. After all, Kevin's surgery wouldn't be cheap. The money from selling the house wouldn't come in right away, and Elizabeth had already spent all her salary buying food and clothes for Kevin. She had no savings left. Elizabeth didn't show up, but Kevin did. Gone was the pitiful act he put on before. He looked at me straight and said, "Elizabeth's doing great. She just feels guilty about divorcing you. You should do her a favor and make it easier." Chapter 8. "You know very well that Elizabeth loves me," Kevin said smugly. "It's better if you have some self-awareness. Spare yourself the embarrassment when this gets ugly." Listening to his tone, you'd think he truly cared about Elizabeth, but we both knew it. He was after the house money that hadn't even come through yet. Back then, we bought the apartment downtown for convenience. It faced south, had plenty of sunlight, and the layout was excellent. Elizabeth and I had barely lived there for long. Southwest, the place was basically brand new. Even as a second-hand listing, the price could reach 8 to 10 million yuan, especially after a kindergarten branch opened nearby, and the area was suddenly reclassified as a top-tier school district. "Keep dreaming," I told him with a smile. "You really think no one sees through your little schemes? I'm not divorcing her, and if I do, we'll go to court with the updated marriage laws. How the assets get split, it's not as simple as you think." Kevin's face changed instantly, so I pressed the advantage. "Besides, it's a fact you two were having an affair. Everyone knows, our co-workers, the neighbors. We've got transfer records, messages, witnesses. If we do go to court, how much do you think Elizabeth will walk away with?" Kevin was so furious he nearly fainted on the spot. He couldn't argue, he had no moral ground to stand on. In the end, all he could do was slam the door and storm off. But that petty interruption didn't ruin my good mood. After all, just one more day, and I'd finally see my parents again. On the final day, as I was wheeled into the operating room, Elizabeth stood at Kevin's side, holding his hand and whispering comforting words. I felt numb by then. Those words just made me nauseous now. Kidney transplant surgery isn't trivial. If it goes wrong, I could die too. Elizabeth never once seemed to care about that. When I woke up, it was past 11:30 p.m. Less than 30 minutes left before I'd go home. By some twist of fate, because Elizabeth had been in such a rush for the house money, the transaction was completed immediately after the surgery. The funds were transferred directly to her bank account. Kevin, greedy as ever, was so eager about it that he rolled into the room in a wheelchair, even though he hadn't recovered enough to stand. The three of us faced off. Kevin pulled out a heavily edited voice recording, twisting my earlier words to make me sound like some calculating man refusing to divorce just to claim property. I smirked, then cut him off before he could even continue. "I agree." Both of them froze. Elizabeth spoke first. "What?" I said. "I agree to the divorce." Kevin's joy was almost visible, but Elizabeth suddenly panicked. "Divorce? What divorce? I just want you and Kevin to be happy." I even smiled faintly as I said it. "What happiness? I don't even love him. I love you. Why would I want a divorce from you?" Kevin looked stunned, rooted to the spot. "Elizabeth, what are you talking about? If you don't love me, why did you treat me so well? Did Oscar say something to make you say this just to spite me?" He tried to roll forward and grab Elizabeth, only to nearly fall over when she yanked her hand away. "What are you even saying? The way I treat you is like a sister to an older brother. The one I love most has always been Oscar." Then she shoved a bank card into my hands. "This is the house money. After paying Kevin's medical and hospital bills, there's still over 6 million yuan left. I know you've suffered so much these past 2 years. I've always wanted to find a way to make it up to you. Take the 6 million, just please. Don't divorce me." Kevin's pupils constricted instantly. He lunged 2 steps forward and clutched Elizabeth's wrist tightly. "You said that money was for me. Why are you giving it to Oscar now?" Chapter 9. For the first time, there was visible disgust in Elizabeth's eyes as she looked at Kevin. She yanked her hand away forcefully, her tone far from gentle. "I've already done more than enough. Gave you a new kidney, paid for your treatment. What more do you want? Don't be so greedy." With that, she called a nurse to push Kevin back to his room. I turned my gaze to the clock on the wall. 5 minutes left. The courier I had booked earlier arrived right on time, bringing the belongings I had packed in advance. When Elizabeth saw me holding a few valuable items, Visible panic flashed across her face. She clutched my hand tightly, her voice trembling slightly. Oscar, why are you taking these things? What are you planning to do? I slipped the bank card into the bag with my belongings and smiled. You sold the house, didn't you? I'm just taking these out in case someone comes to view the place and steals them. Elizabeth held my hand even tighter. Is that really true? I looked into her trembling eyes and didn't answer. Elizabeth, I asked softly, if I left, would you be sad? She suddenly threw her arms around me. What are you saying? We'll never be apart. I froze for a second, unsure how to respond. This city life is too exhausting, she whispered gently, like the girl I'd once fallen in love with. Let's go back to the countryside. Okay, start a small business, work when we want to, travel when we feel like it. We won't have to live like this anymore. We'll build our own house, put a little courtyard in front, plant some flowers, grow our own vegetables. Her voice was so soft, so full of hope, but it was too late. Everything was too late. My eyes began to blur with tears as I watched the minute hand tick closer and closer to 12. The clock struck midnight. A breeze fluttered the curtains. The bedside lamp flickered. And when I opened my eyes again, Elizabeth stood frozen in place. She was still holding her arms out, in the posture of an embrace. But where I had been, there was now nothing. I was gone. When I arrived at the doorstep of my real home, with 6 million yuan and a few valuable keepsakes in my bag, I stood frozen, finger hovering over the doorbell. After all these years of vanishing without a trace, I couldn't imagine what my parents looked like now. But before I could press the bell, the door opened. My parents weren't even 50, but their hair had gone entirely gray. No words were needed. Everything was said in the trembling hugs, in the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Mom, Dad, I'm home. Not long after returning to the real world, the system's voice rang in my ears once more. Ding ding ding, task progress complete. Reward unlocked, the lens of insight. Tap to use. The lens of insight. Suspicious. I tapped to activate it. Suddenly, an image appeared before me. After I left, the system erased all traces of my existence from that world. No one remembered me, except Elizabeth. Everyone thought she'd marry Kevin, but when he proposed, she slapped him hard. Kevin, humiliated and furious, cut ties with her. Eventually, he wormed his way into marrying into a wealthy family, only to be manipulated and ultimately die a calculated death. People said Elizabeth had gone insane. She was often found sitting in silence, holding the second-hand laptop I had once sold. Eventually, her family couldn't bear it anymore and committed her to a psychiatric hospital. I closed my eyes. The image vanished. I stood up, walked to my desk, and picked up a photo, the one I had accidentally brought back with me. Click. The lighter hissed. Flames curled around the edges of the photo. In the end, everything turned to ash, and ahead of me, a brand new life was waiting to begin.